Do you guys know what I mean when I say amen, crowd? So my primary field of study is religion. And sometimes in Judaism and Christianity, if you hear something that's true, you call it what it is.
Amen.
You call it out as truth. And if you're going to call something truth, you might as well do it in ancient Aramaic, right? Amen just means truth in Aramaic. It's great. So if you hear something that's true, feel free to just call it out as truth. Sound all right?
Amen.
There we go, my friends. For example, if I were to say this room is filled with brilliant scholars, you all would say?
Amen.
There we go. If I were to say that cohort 2 is going to change the world, you would say?
Amen.
There we go. If I said that cohort 2 is filled with brilliant writers, you all would say?
Amen. But you all are growing into brilliant writers, right?
Yes, amen.
And your writing is going to change the world, right?
Amen.
There we go. That's what I'm talking about. My friends, I was asked to speak today on the topic of finding inspiration in the writing process. And the truth is that this is perhaps a slightly overlooked topic in doctoral studies because it is very important and rather difficult to maintain inspiration in the writing process. Here's what I mean. Any of you guys have inspiration to come into a doctoral program? You have a moment when you were inspired to do this, when you made the decision to do it, right? Any of you guys get tired when it's 12 at night, it's midnight, and you're reading articles, and you have way too much to read and not enough time to do it all in? Do you remember your inspiration then? That's why it's important to remember our inspiration, and to know how to hold on to that throughout the duration of the entire degree. Because here's the thing, my friends, when we are working on a problem of practice, there is a very real problem to the problem of practice. The problem is that the problem of practice is not like an ordinary paper. It is not a project that you start and finish in one semester, that you can sit down and write over the course of a couple of weeks. The problem of practice is that you are going to be working on this for years. 2 years of your program. The first year of your program, you're building up, you're getting ready for it, you're formally starting to write now. But that is a long time to maintain momentum on a project, am I correct?
Yes.
And that is a lot of late nights doing homework in which you could forget your inspiration. Am I correct?
Amen.
That's the problem with the problem of practice. And that's why, does anyone know what these 3 letters mean?
Yes.
What do they mean?
All but dissertation.
All but dissertation. ABD. You guys know about 50% of people who start doctoral programs do not finish. This is where the majority ends. ABD.
Yeah.
All but dissertation. Meaning they went through all the coursework. They did all the reading. They did all the assignments. They got all the right grades. And that last component is the one hurdle they didn't get over. That thesis. That dissertation. That problem of practice. Because that's a big project, right? And you guys all know, you're researching these problem of practice. These are complex issues, am I right? And they're hard to get our minds around sometimes. They're even harder to write about, am I correct? And now we're going to put ourselves in that process for 2 years. That's the challenge of the problem of practice. Maintaining that momentum the entire time so that you come out on the other side with this fantastic project finished. And so when I first spoke with you all at the beginning of this semester, do you all remember that? I think I spoke in your class, is that right? Excellent. Okay, and I gave you the 3 magic ingredients of writing. And these 3 magic ingredients, basically I came up with just because these are the 3 things. If there's only 3 things you need to make it through writing a project of this magnitude and of this importance, it's these 3 things. Time, momentum, and revision. Time, because good writing takes time. Formulating our words, formulating our thoughts, getting the wording right so that it is impactful in the world around us, that takes time. And so I told you all, schedule time for the writing process. Schedule the time. Block it off on your calendar. Let that be a sacred moment in your day in which no one can interrupt you. A sacred moment in which you are going to dive into the literature, into the scholarship, and you are going to find answers that no one has found before. Time. Be prepared to put in the time. But the second is equally as important. Momentum. Momentum. Because it's very easy for us to lose momentum. Especially when we feel like we're in a stressful semester. especially when we feel like we have way too much work to get done, not enough time to do it all in, and maybe fast.
Amen.
But here's the thing, okay? So one of the best ways to maintain momentum, and this has been proven, write every day. Every day. Even if it's only for 15 to 30 minutes. Here's the thing. Robert Boyce in 1999 conducted a study of tenure-track faculty members. And he began observing them from the moment they received their letter of acceptance into a tenure-track position. And he followed them for the following 6 years, during which time they were supposed to write and publish in order to attain tenure. And here's what he found. He tracked their writing habits. And he discovered from all these faculty members that the faculty members who wrote every single day, even on their busiest days, just for 15 to 30 minutes, the ones who wrote every single day at the end of the 6 years had spent twice as much time writing as those who only wrote on the weekends or here and there. Twice as much time overall. But here's what's so powerful about it. In that time, they produced 10 times more publications. 10 times more publications. Because their writing time became more efficient. It became more effective when they maintained that momentum, when they kept writing. I can't tell you how many doctoral students I've seen who lose momentum and just stop writing on the dissertation or the thesis or the problem of practice. And it's really hard to come back, to get back into that routine. Best thing you can do, maintain momentum. And then the third thing, revision. Everything that you write will get revised. This is part of the process. It's beautiful. Okay, so one thing that I always tell students, do not despise rough first drafts. And I mean really rough first drafts. Y'all wouldn't know what I'm talking about when I say really rough, right? Yeah, you guys have never emailed me a really rough first draft, right? Do not despise rough first drafts. Really crummy first drafts. Because you'll come back and you'll revise, you'll refine, you'll write, you'll rewrite. And that is how you take these ideas that may be kind of ephemeral out there and you're trying to collect them. And that's how you can turn them into really impactful language that makes a difference in the world. When you are continually refining and revising it, making it more and more powerful. So the 3 magic ingredients are what?
Time, momentum, revision.
Fantastic, my friends. How are we feeling so far? Excellent. Okay. So what I want to talk about when it comes to finding our inspiration is the psychology of writing. Like what writing actually is psychologically. And what I found when I was researching this is a remarkably underdeveloped field, actually. There was one book a while ago by Ronald Kellogg called The Psychology of Writing. And here's the thing, I read through this entire book, and it's basically 250 pages of cognitive psychology and semiotics. So it was near unintelligible to me. But here's what I found. This entire book, basically, if I could summarize it in just a few words, and I'm going to try this here, writing is just thinking external. That's all it is. Writing is just us trying to take the thoughts that we have and put them outside of us. But here's why this matters. Because in that process, we have to refine what we're thinking. Here's what I mean. Writing helps us organize our thoughts. Have you guys ever, you do a lot of research, there are a lot of complex factors that you have to try and account for in your research. And you have a hard time figuring out how to pull them all together. Has anyone ever been there? Yeah, you feel like you have a cloud of information but no straight way forward? I'm not just speaking to myself, am I? Yeah. But when we actually start writing it out, we take those thoughts, we put them on paper, now they're outside of us. And now we can start organizing them and arranging them. And we can start revising the arrangements, okay? So for nearly, I would say probably about half the papers I receive, at some point I'm going to make a comment that says, this is great information. It belongs somewhere else. Really, great information. It belongs somewhere else, right? Because you've got the great thoughts outside of your mind now, and now we just think about what's the best order to put them in. What's the most effective way to present them to a reader to be convincing? And so the process of writing can actually help us come to understand our thoughts better, our fields better, because we get them outside of us on the paper and we can see them all laid out. And we can start to see how they connect. That's the power of what writing can do for us. And so I often tell people, if you're reading through a book or a series of books, you're having a hard time following what the book is saying, start writing. No, really, start writing what you're seeing in the book. And that will help you start to organize what you're seeing. But here's the other thing that writing helps us do. It helps us refine our language. Refining the way we want to present these ideas. And here's why this matters. Language is not just a collection of words that we use for things in the world. Does anyone here speak multiple languages? Anyone here multiple languages? Excellent, fantastic, excellent. Have you ever had to translate between languages and you find things that just don't translate well? Yeah. When I worked in Bolivia trying to learn Spanish, let me tell you what, I have a remarkable gift for embarrassing myself. Okay, like one time I convinced the words hombre and hambre. Yeah, so I was walking around all week saying, yo tengo mucho hombre, and people are like, yeah, no. Okay? But it's okay, because then I learned how to say, yo soy embarazada, right? Okay, by the way, so I walked around trying to say I was really embarrassed whenever I messed up Spanish, and I said embarazada. I don't get embarazada. No, that means pregnant. But here's the thing. For those of you who speak multiple languages, you ever move between languages, you'll see there are things that don't translate well. Because embodied within a language is not just a collection of words. It's actually a way of viewing the world. It's a way of viewing the world. Here's what I mean. When I was working in Cochabamba, Bolivia, the indigenous language in Cochabamba is Quechua. And so it came about that I needed to learn Quechua. And so one of my friends was trying to teach me Quechua. She was giving me phrases, and I was just asking her, how do you say this? How do you say that? Basic phrases that you would use in any day, everyday life. And so at one point I asked her, ¿Cómo se dice lo siento en Quechua? How do you say I'm sorry in Quechua? And she pauses and she looks at me and she's like, well, there's not really a I'm sorry. She said, you could say that shouldn't have happened, but that's kind of different than saying I'm sorry. And think about it. That's two very different ways of viewing regret. When I say I'm sorry, the focus is on who? When I say that shouldn't have happened, the focus is on what? Yeah. Or, for example, if I were to say in German, es tut mir leid, that causes me grief, or that causes me suffering. It's a different way of defining the relationship between me and whatever event I'm talking about. German has one way of articulating it. Quechua has a different way of articulating it. English has a different way of articulating it. And you see, that's what language does for us, is it shapes the categories we use to interpret the world. It shapes the way we view the world, the lens we use to interpret the world. Have you guys ever heard about Eskimo languages and the number of words they have for snow? Has anyone ever heard that before? Yeah, there's various, let me see if I can get this here. Yeah, so in Inuit languages, and I should probably say, a lot of times we speak about like Eskimo peoples. They're not one people group, and they go by the name Inuit. And there are different linguistic registrars and profiles among Inuit peoples. But one of the things that's fascinating is depending upon which language you're working with, they generally have somewhere between 12 to 24 words for snow. 12 to 24 words for snow. Because in their world, their language allows them to see nuances in different kinds of snow that I, being from Miami, just never had to see. And my language doesn't allow me to see. But English also has multiple words for things, and it shows where we like to draw nuances, right? For example, does anyone know how many different words we have in North America for the sub sandwich? We have 13 different words for just a sub sandwich. It tells you what kind of nuances we like to draw, right? America. But here's the point. Language shapes the way we view the world. And language shapes the categories we use to interpret the world. This is why your theoretical framework matters so much. Because your theoretical framework can give you the language to adjust the lens that we have been using to perceive a problem. And you can come up to a problem and say, everyone before this has been using these categories, this language, deficit-based language, in order to interpret this problem. And you can come now and apply a different language, a theoretical framework, that can help you see different nuances in this problem that have not been seen before. And when you can see new nuances in the problem that have not been seen before, you will be able to find ways forward that have not been seen before. What writing does is it forces us to choose the language we use to frame the issues that we're discussing. And when we choose to frame and to reframe the language, we can choose to reshape the categories that these questions, problems, and challenges are going to be discussed using. That's where we can make an impact. And that's where we can move the field forward. This is all what writing can do. In the same book, Kellogg found that writing requires the same kind of mental focus and exertion as translating between languages. Because that's what you're doing. You are seeing issues, questions, and concerns, and you are translating them into language so that others can understand what you're seeing. How are we doing so far? Yes, ma'am.
So in your analogy about the sub-sandwich, does that mean as a writer that I need to invent or create the 15th version of that?
Of the sub-sandwich?
Yeah. When I'm writing and I've read and I've interpreted 14 versions that are saying the same thing, whether they're saying it's mattering versus inclusion versus actualization of identity, they all are the same thing. Now my challenge is I need to come up with the 15th one because of plagiarism and because of, I mean, how do we, that's that judgment call. At what point do we repeat what they say for the essence of the message versus the concerns for plagiarism as we try to say again what they're saying as subway number 15.
When we find a writer that uses the language that captures what we're trying to say, we can use that term. We don't have to keep reinventing it. But sometimes we find that those who have written about the issue in the past haven't quite used the language that captures what we're seeing in the present. It's kind of like this. Have y'all ever listened to breakup songs? You guys know what I'm talking about? Okay, so we don't know what I'm talking about when I say breakup songs, right? Breakup songs can be really powerful, can't they? Why? They help us move on. They articulate what we're feeling. They take the feelings, because, look, when you go through a rough breakup, okay, I promise not to start crying, okay? But if we go through a rough breakup, sometimes, we got a lot of emotions, right? And sometimes people ask us, what are you feeling? I don't know what I'm feeling. I'm feeling everything and nothing at the same time. But then I hear someone else who puts it into words. And I can capture that. And I'm like, okay, those words capture what I'm feeling. Or it's like this, okay? I'm going to go back into a dysfunctional relationship kind of thing. You all are going to be psychoanalyzing me after this, all right? Why is it that when I end up in a dysfunctional or an unhealthy relationship, everyone in my life can see it but me? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Or am I just standing up here alone today? No, seriously, okay? But when I see that there is an unhealthy behavioral pattern, and I can call it that, all of a sudden I realize, wait a second, that was there the entire time. I just didn't have the language for it. And so I had a hard time pinning it down and identifying it, labeling it, and naming it so that I could address it. That's the power that language gives to us. And so sometimes we're going to find authors who use language that nail it. And they're going to open up our minds to how to view this issue. And it is beautiful. It opens up a whole new world to us. And there are sometimes we're going to read authors where we say, okay, they've got some good ideas, but they are not quite nailing what I am seeing in this issue. And so I have to find a different language to use to talk about, a different way of framing it, so that I can help others also see what I'm seeing. That's the power of language. That's the power of a theoretical or a conceptual framework. Is that kind of helpful?
Amen.
Brilliant question. Brilliant question. How are we doing, friends? Excellent, excellent. Now, since I'm not paying y'all enough for therapy, we're going to keep moving on. Is that okay? Okay, so let's get to some basic points here on finding inspiration in the writing process, because that's really why we're all here. Am I correct? Excellent. All right. So number one, remember. Remember. If you want inspiration in the writing process, you have to remember. Many of you have learned today that I was a college athlete. And whenever I tell people that I was a college athlete, they look at me and they say, wait, really? And then I say cross country, and they're like, oh yeah, I'd forgotten that was a sport. But here's the thing that my coach taught me, because we would wake up at 5 a.m. to go running, which is a miserable time to wake up to go running, by the way. Discipline is remembering what you want. It's just remembering what you want. And so when it was hard for me to get out of bed at 5 a.m., I had to remember what I wanted. I had to remember my goals. And that's what got me up. And when it was hard to get out of bed at 5 a.m. to write my dissertation, I had to remember what I wanted. I had to remember my goals. And that got me out of bed. It's all about remembering. Because that's the problem. I mentioned at the beginning that you all were inspired in some way to come do doctoral work. Am I correct? And you were inspired to write on these problem of practices, these issues. Am I correct? Yes. But sometimes we don't always remember that inspiration. Because when it gets into the thick of the semester, and we're overworked and underslept, sometimes the inspiration of the past doesn't stick with us, does it? There are 3 things we need to remember when we're writing to keep that inspiration. We need to remember our calling, the moments of our calling. Can you think back to a moment when you realized that doctoral work was not just something you wanted to do, but it was actually the path that had been laid out before you? Like you knew this is the way you were going. Or can you remember the moments when you decided this is the problem you wanted to write on? Here's what I want us to do. Can we take 2 minutes? We've got some groups around here, groups of 2 or 3. Just share that moment when you realized you had a calling to write on this. Can we do that? Groups of 2 or 3, go.
Been successful at that as well, so she's probably going to return.
Wow. Saw a good person leave the field.
Yep.
That's powerful. Amen?
Amen.
Last one.
I'd say, as a special ed teacher, there was a problem that I knew I wanted to do something about, but when I got my son's diagnosis, I knew I had to do something about it.
Wow. That's powerful. Amen? We need to remember the reason why we got into this, the reason why we chose this discipline, this field, this question. In those moments when we're losing that inspiration. We also need to remember the people behind our calling. Because let's be honest, none of us in this room are here on our own. Am I correct? No. We've got friends, we've got family, we've got neighbors who have helped us along the way. We have teachers of our own who invested in us. People who poured into us so that we could go forth and really change the world. We need to remember the people behind our calling as well. Those who made it possible so that we could be here. Can I tell you all a quick story? when I was working in South America, I worked with street children, and I worked for an organization that had an orphanage. And many of the kids who came through the orphanage had never been to school before. And so we would do kind of special tutoring, we'd work with them on their homework. Many of the kids did not speak Spanish when they came in, they only spoke Quechua, and instruction was only in Spanish. We had to do language training before they could go to school. And, you know, I'm theologically trained, went to seminary, pastor, all that stuff. And one night I was talking to one of the boys, Alfredo, and he was doing his homework, and he just looked up and he asked me a question. If God loves us, why is there so much pain in this world? And I kind of, paused, asked him a little bit more, we talked a little bit. He'd been through a lot of pain. He had been. And then, we have these American teams that would come down and do projects at the orphanage, and one of the things they would do is work with the kids, play with the kids, things like that. And then the next question he asked really got me. Why does everyone treat me like a project? He wasn't looking for an encyclopedia. He wasn't looking for someone who could spout off theological books. He was looking for someone to sit with him, and actually be in a real relationship. I gotta remember Alfredo every time I do this kind of work, because it's very easy to get stuck behind a computer and only engage people through emails, and to lose the actual connection to people. We have to remember the people behind our calling. And we also have to remember those before our calling, or those in front of our calling. Because those who invested in us did so that we can invest in others. And that's part of what this process is about, is being prepared to invest in others. Each of you are writing a problem of practice because you want to make a difference. You have seen something that is not right, and you have called it as such. It is not okay that this continues to happen over and over again, and so you are here to do something about it. Am I correct? Yes. And we have to remember the people that will impact. The students. Maybe not those that are in school now, but those who will be in school after your changes come into effect. The teachers. Maybe not those who are in the field now, but those who can come into the field after your research makes that difference. And we have to remember that whenever we sit down to write. When it may be a little bit too late, we may be a little bit too underslept. But it's because we're here pursuing a calling. Amen? And this is really number 2. We have to believe. There are many things we have to believe in order to make this work meaningful, in order to make this work happen. Because if we believe that this problem of practice will not make a difference, we will not be able to invest ourselves in it. And that's one of the issues that a lot of doctoral students face, is they get so caught up in the books, in the articles, in the paperwork, that we lose sight of that sense of calling, and we can also lose the belief that this can even make a difference in the end. We have to believe in the power of change. And it's really hard when everything we look at seems to be a problem. Anyone here researching complex problems? Anyone here spending a lot of time looking at things that are wrong? Here's the thing. When I stand in the midst of a storm, and all I look at is the storm, what's the only thing I see? A storm. And it's really hard to see anything other than the storm when I'm in that moment, isn't it? We have to believe that we can make a difference. And sometimes one of the tricks I have to use is I have to remind myself of people who have come before me who did make a difference. Can you all think of someone who invested in you that made a difference in your life? Can you think of someone who stood up and said, this is not okay, and actually worked for change and brought about change? We have to remember that change is possible in order for this work to be meaningful. Amen? We have to believe in the power of vision. And more importantly, in the power of your vision. Think about the unique combination of experiences, of passions, of knowledge, of talents that have come together in your life. Think about that. You are uniquely positioned to see these issues in a very unique way. in a way that can move the conversation forward, in a way that can make a difference. We have to believe in the power of that vision. That you have been prepared to see these issues in a way that have not been seen before, so that you can make a difference. And we also need to believe in the power of words. More particularly, the value of your words. That your words can, in fact, make a difference. That your words can, in fact, make a change. And once again, whenever I'm sitting there writing, and I don't think anyone's ever going to read it after me, I have to remind myself of the people who sat down and wrote and influenced my life. They may have never seen it. They may have never seen the influence that they had on me, but they did. There's a famous author who wrote, it's Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He wrote A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Does anyone know that book, Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich? Okay, so I just revealed that I am a closet fan of Russian literature, apparently. He was the first Russian novelist to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. And when he won the Nobel Prize, he gave this speech called Beauty Will Save the World. What he did was he took a line from Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot. Beauty will save the world. And here's the entire point. When I sit down, I see something about the world that's not right, and I capture it. In my words, in poetry, in painting, in art, whatever it is. Once it's captured, it has the power to circulate around the world. And someone else can find it, can find inspiration in it. And all of a sudden, a teacher who's halfway around the world can find your words and find inspiration in them and find a way forward. Just like how you can find someone who may be in a completely different country, who engaged a problem, who addressed it, who found a way forward, and who can inspire you as well. Beauty can save the world because it connects us. From womb to tomb, we are all connected. Point 3, we need to learn to share. And I'm not just talking about like me teaching my 3-year-old how to share, which is remarkably difficult, by the way. Y'all ever tried that? Oh my goodness. There's a great book by Peter Elbow called Writing with Power. And one of the things that Peter Elbow does is he frames writing as a form of sharing. Think about this. I just mentioned, think about the unique combination of gifts, passions, talents, and experiences that come together in your life that uniquely position you to speak as an expert on this topic. That is a gift. And it's a gift that would be wasted if we kept it all to ourselves. That unique combination of gifts, passions, and talents is what empowers you, what enables you to be able to share something with the world that the world otherwise would not have. Writing as sharing. It is taking everything that everyone has ever invested in you, condensing it, and passing it on to the next generation. There's this famous old rabbinic story. Can I tell you all an old rabbinic story? I want to tell you all an old rabbinic. Can I tell you all an old rabbinic story? Okay. It's this famous old rabbinic story. I believe it's in the Talmud. And Caesar is traveling through the land of Judea. And the thing to understand is in old rabbinic stories, when it talks about Caesar, usually Caesar is not looked upon positively. There's an elderly Jewish man who's standing there who's digging a fig tree, or digging a hole to plant a fig tree. And so Caesar comes up to the old man and kind of scoffs at him and says, "You there, graybeard." By the way, in Aramaic, graybeard is like a derogatory way to call out an old person. Okay. "You there, graybeard," says, "you don't actually expect to live long enough to eat the fruit off this tree, do you?" And the old man says, "Well, if the Lord grants me strength, I might. But if not, I ate my entire life off the trees of those who came before me. It is only right that I should plant for those who come after me." Caesar, got a kick out of it, and he said, "Well, I'll tell you what, if you live long enough to eat the fruit off this tree, you bring some to me. I'd love to hear about it." Well, 10 years later, the elderly man was outside. He saw the fig tree was beginning to bear fruits, and he thought, "You know what? I'm going to bring some of that fruit to the Caesar." So the old man, he gets the figs, puts them inside a little bag, brings them over to Caesar's palace. The guards are very confused. Why is this old Jewish man coming up to the palace? But after much convincing, they finally let the old man in. The old man comes before Caesar, says, "Well, Caesar, I'm sure you remember 10 years ago that old Jewish man planting a tree, and I just thought you would like to share some of these figs with me." And the Caesar got a kick out of it. And so the Caesar said, "Come, sit, tell me about your journeys, tell me about your travels. We're going to eat these figs together." And after they'd eaten the figs, Caesar commands that his bag, his sack, be filled with gold. So the man comes back home rich. Well, the man also has a neighbor, a nosy neighbor. We all have one of those? If you don't, you should try it. It's a fantastic experience. And the nosy neighbor looks around and says, "Oh my goodness, the Caesar likes figs. I know what I'll do. I'll go get a really big sack, and I'll bring a bunch of figs down to the palace, and the Caesar will give me a ton of gold." Man gets the sack, goes down to the palace, and the guards won't let him in. The guards are like, "What are you doing here with all these figs?" They go and tell Caesar. Caesar's like, "I don't know who this guy is." And so, in good old Roman fashion, they decide to teach him a lesson. They sit him outside the gates and basically have people throw the figs at him all day. The dude comes back home. He's bruised. He's swollen. He's got fig juice all over his beard. And his wife looks at him and says, "What happened to you?" And he goes, "Oh, my dear, if only you'd been there to share in my glory." And he tells her the whole tale, and he says, "You should have been there. You should have been there right there with me. You put me up to this. You would have made a better target." And by the way, man, don't ever say that to your wife. Because, no. And she looks at him and she says, "Just be thankful it wasn't coconuts. They would have killed you." That's as funny as old rabbinic stories get. But here's the point. We plant trees for the next generation. Those who came before us planted trees for us. We plant for those who come after us. We might not see the impact that it has. We might not live long enough to see the impact that it has, but it doesn't mean the work lacks value. We plant for those who come after us. Writing is sharing. What Elbow says is that there are two mental states to write. We need to be able to write creatively, and we also need to be able to revise critically. But here's what he says: we cannot do both at the same time. Here's what he means. In order to make a way forward, you have to free yourself from the fears and the constraints of writing poorly, and just write. Put it out there. It may not come out right at first. That's okay. Then you switch. You stop the creative aspect and you come back and you revise. But for him, you can't do both at the same time. Because critical revision will shackle your creativity. If every time you write a sentence, you have to go back and delete it to make it perfect. It will never be perfect the first time, and that's okay. We have to switch between the two mental states. We can't keep them both together. How are we doing so far, my friends? Here's the last point I want to make. Receive. We are not only sharing with others, but in order to maintain our inspiration, we receive from those around us. Here's the thing. Writing is a remarkably personal expression of the self. And so when we put our words out there and someone criticizes it, how does that feel? Yeah, it's not great, right? Faculty advisors, have you ever submitted something for publication? You get a rejection? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Always accepted on the first try. I don't know about you, but I have had some really harsh rejections. And it hurts. Because that's an expression of who I am. And when that criticism hurts, I am tempted to not share what I have with the world. Learning how to receive criticism on our writing is one of the best things we can do for maintaining that inspiration. Because here's the thing. Constructive feedback is caring. Constructive feedback is caring. When I drop 100 comments on your document, okay? It'll come. It's because I believe in your project. The worst thing, okay, seriously, it's because your project was worth reading 3 times. It's because I believe in your project. And when your faculty advisors, okay, give you constructive feedback, it's because they believe in your project. And that's what we have to do. Invite feedback from those who care. Remember, it's not going to come out perfect the first time. That's okay. It's going to be revised. And those around us, the community around us, helps us do that. One of the best pieces of advice that I received as a doctoral student is before I put my words out there for the world to see, ask my friends, those who care to see it first. Because you know what? When you give constructive feedback on my writing, I can receive that a lot better when I know that you care about me, right? When I know that you're my friend, when I know that you're looking out for what's best for me. Invite feedback from those who care, and diversify your feedback. Have different people look at what you're writing and give feedback, even before your faculty members see it. As iron sharpens iron, so does one person sharpen another. From womb to tomb, we are all connected, and we all depend on one another. And we gain inspiration from one another. Did y'all see your colleagues' posters? Were those inspiring?
Yes.
Yeah, amen, somebody. When I did doctoral work, okay, there were several of us in the cohorts, and we worked together a lot, but we had this saying. It was called the mantra of the antelope. Mantra of the antelope. Safety in numbers. We can take care of one another. We're not going to leave anyone behind in this program. And when my friend, Dr. Rebecca Wittenpoe Hayes, who is now a tenure track faculty member, when she graduated, she got this for me. Because we are still a community of scholars who gain inspiration from one another. We read each other's papers before we turned them in. We provided critical feedback because we believed in the work that each other were doing. We believed in the possibility that each of us was going to make a difference. We still read work for one another and swap it back and forth, even though we are scattered across the nation now. And when I read great stuff that they're doing, it inspires me to keep writing. It inspires me to keep making a difference. When I see great writing from them, it inspires me. We gain inspiration from one another, from this community. It's when we start getting isolated, and we're just surrounded by the books and the articles, that we can start to forget what got us into this in the first place. I asked you to share your inspiration with one another, and here's the reason why. Sometimes when we have a hard time remembering why we got into this, sometimes we have a hard time believing that we can make a difference, we can remember and believe for one another. I can remember why you got into this and remind you of that. And I can tell you that I believe you're going to make a difference, even in those moments when we may not believe it for ourselves. Amen?
Amen.
I believe you guys are going to make a difference. And I believe you guys are going to change the world. That's why I'm going to push you to be the best writers that you can be. When you come out of this program, I want you to be able to publish in the same journals that Dr. Meehan publishes in. And when you come out of this program, I want you to present at the same conferences that Dr. Talbot presents in. I believe in each of you. Go forth. Write. Change the world. Amen.